Okay, hello everybody, this is the second part of the poll that I mentioned. We took votes, I took votes in, I sort of counted them up, and after a while it became apparent that there wasn't much point in continuing to count anymore because, well, it seems pretty unanimous actually. To my kind of surprise, because I didn't think it would get picked. Most of you voted for Invasio Barbarorum. Yeah. I mean, wow, I mean, it's staggering, really. I mean, there's about 5 votes for Vanilla, 6 or 7 for Roma Rectum, about 5 for 77 BC, and there's like 50 for Invasio Barbarorum. So, what can I say? The viewers have spoken. So, as I said, this is the second part of the poll, where I will sort of display the factions available in the campaign, and you guys can vote on which one you'd rather see the most. So, without further ado, single player, main campaign. These are the factions available to us. I'll go through them one at a time. First we have the Huns, who start up here in sort of the Ukraine somewhere, I believe. The Huns, led by Attila the Hun, should be pretty self-explanatory. They're kind of nomadic horse archers. They're almost like very early versions of the Mongols. In real life, they managed to carve a bloody swathe all the way through Europe until they reached Chalons in France, or then Gaul, where the Romans beat the crap out of them and sent them packing. Basically, the Huns are very much the migration of the Huns westwards from Asia is very much one of the reasons why the barbarians were all sort of pushing to get over into the Roman Empire past the defences on the River Rhine in the first place. So the Huns have a heck of a lot to do with the entire setting. So they're kind of interesting. The estimated difficulty for them is easy because, well, you know, they start off with lots of stuff, they start off with lots of armies, and their battles are not exactly very difficult. Yes, a snippet of the intro thing here. In 376 AD, word reached the Roman world of a fierce people far in the east. Goth witches, it was said, had been driven from their own tribes and had then coupled with malign spirits to produce half-men who lived their entire lives on horseback. These creatures were monsters with the faces of devils, horned and strange. More frightening still, the Goths themselves were begging for sanctuary within the empire. The new terror was, of course, the Huns. They were a completely nomadic people from the wide-open steppes, and one of the most successful to ever emerge from the wilderness to threaten more civilized people. There may even have been the Xiongnu who threatened China. So there you go. Wherever they come from, the Huns strike terror into their enemies and have absorbed weaker tribes such as the Alans into their ranks. So there you go. That's what they're all about. Like I said, it's fairly self-explanatory. If you're wondering where the Dothraki are inspired from in Game of Thrones, the Dothraki are the Huns, basically. Practically a carbon copy in many ways. So there you go, that's them. The next faction we have is the Visigoths. Estimated difficulty factor is moderate for these guys. The Goths were an ancient Germanic people from the Baltic coast region, so that's up here. Who migrated towards Dacia in the 3rd century AD, but before that they were reputed to have crossed the Baltic from their original homeland. They settled around the Vistula River, and at some point the tribes divided into the Ostrogoths and the Visigoths, or Western Goths. The Western Goths were the first barbarians to carry out major incursion into Roman territory, and while the other barbarians were even more brutal in their war-making, the Goths struck fear into their enemies. Their practice of sacrificing captives to their war god Tiz was particularly horrifying. This practice has been abandoned now that the Goths have adopted the Arian version of Christianity. They are, however, still dangerous warriors and well able to exploit any weakness in Roman lands or among their more barbarous neighbours. Historically, the Goths were driven across the Danube and into Roman territory by pressure from the steppes. The Huns, like we discussed just now. So yeah, the Goths are interesting enough. King Alaric of the Visigoths, obviously, is the chap who sacked Rome, and the campaign essentially begins with the sack of Rome. So if you're playing as the Visigoths, you start off with about 5 or 6 stacks of units, slap bang in the middle of Italy next to Rome. They're an interesting enough faction, I suppose. They're one of the horde factions, so they don't start off with an actual homeland, if you like. They don't have any cities. They start off as basically just a wandering stack of armies. So, from a military perspective, they are barbarians, although they're probably more civilized than some of the other barbarians, like, say, the Huns or whatever. They have a lot of quite elite troops that can, relatively speaking, go toe-to-toe with a lot of Roman troops. So, they're not pushovers at all, you know. It's not like the Germanic tribes or the Celts or whatever from back in the days of the Republic and the early Empire. The Goths are serious badasses, basically. I mean, they stacked Rome, what more can you say? So that's them. Next we have the Perse-Armenians, who are, to save a long story short, they're essentially Armenia that's now Christian because of the spread of Christianity, and that's basically all there kind of is to it, really. And they kind of live up here-ish, near the Caucasus, where Armenia is in real life, essentially. Now we have the Vandals. They're another Germanic barbarian faction. These guys migrated from bugger knows where, all the way, historically, all the way through Europe, through Spain, and then into North Africa. That's where they finally settled down, which is a pretty insane migratory journey, but there it is. They start off in Spain with a couple of cities and a few they're kind of on the move still. I think they're considered a horde faction, though they do have control of a few cities. They're kind of like the Goths, essentially. Just have slightly different units and stuff like that. You have the Franks, which is the barbarian tribe which later went on to become, well, France, essentially, hence the name. These guys settled in what is now France, and they, over the centuries, they became the Kingdom of France, one way or another. So yeah, these are the Frankish tribes. The Franks, or Franchi, the name was translated as free men, were Germanic people originally from the region around the Middle and Lower Rhine in western Germany. Tacitus lumped them together with all the ferocious Germani tribes when the Romans first encountered them, but they were organised enough to hold the Romans at bay. They were not organised enough, however, to attack Roman lands as a coherent force, even a couple of centuries later. With the disappearance of the Cherusi as a tribal power, the Franks emerged as a coalition of smaller tribes. Such a defensive alliance was inevitable in the face of external pressures, such as the migration of nomadic peoples from the east. They're a lot like the Goths, and they have Vandals. I think they're slightly less organised, basically, and I think they're interesting because at one point or another, I believe, during the reign of Emperor Julian, they were actually allies to the Romans. They were feudus, as it's called, and they were allowed to live in Roman lands in their own kind of autonomous region on the west side of the Rhine River. So that's kind of interesting. So that's the Franks, basically. Their estimated difficulty is pretty easy. Then you have the Saxons, who are the ancestors of the modern day English people, essentially. English people are kind of descended from a mix of the original Britons that lived in Britain, as well as the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes. Jukes? Lol, no. The Jutes, J-U-T-E-S, that invaded Britain and migrated there, essentially. So yeah, the Saxons are another Germanic faction, a lot like the others, except they come from sort of northern Germany and Denmark, and but the thing with these guys is they're essentially, unlike the other Germanic tribes who sort of migrated down into Europe and down into the Roman Empire, the Saxons jumped on boats and migrated over to Britain instead, which proved to be a fairly smart move in the end. So at this point they're pagan. Eventually, later on, once they'd conquered most of England, they converted to Christianity. Yep, there you go. Historically, the Saxons and Angles, a sub-tribe, created the idea of England instead of Britain. Their influence and language has lasted until the present day. And most of the English languages we know today, including plenty of words, are derived from the Saxons. Like, for example, the very fact that we call Earth planet Earth is because it's derived from a Saxon word which was like Erda or something. So there you go. The Saxons essentially named our planet at the end of the day. So, there you go. They're an interesting enough faction. Again, I think estimated difficulty moderate. They don't have it as easy as the Franks, but they're not too difficult to play as. I've tried them before. So there you go. They're not a horde faction like some of the others, though. It's worth bearing in mind. Then there's the Picts. These are basically the ancient tribesmen who lived in what is now Scotland. Not much else to say about it, other than the Romans tried and failed to conquer them, hence they built Hadrian's Wall in the north of England to ward them off. Estimated difficulty, hard, yep, very fucking hard. These guys are a bit ridiculous because they don't have any serious proper units. They're I kind of almost feel like the developers threw them in as a flavor faction, which basically said, yeah, okay, they're playable if you really want the challenge, because these guys are ridiculously difficult to play. Ridiculously difficult. So, you know, they can outnumber an enemy army of Britons or Romans or whatever, and they can still get completely and utterly smashed because their units are just terrible, basically. Next we have the Sassanids, which are the guys who take up what was kind of most of the Seleucid Empire in the original Rome Total War. These guys... they came after the Parthians. I don't really know a heck of a lot about the Sassanids, basically, but they're kind of just this big Eastern Persian faction. They're kind of a new Persian empire, essentially, and they're in the East, and they're pretty big and powerful. Yeah, like I said, don't know bugger all about these guys, essentially. All I've come into contact with them is when I've fought against them when I was playing an East Roman Empire campaign, so there you go. Yeah. Okay, what else have we got? We've got the Hepthalites, which are also referred to by some as the White Huns, which are kind of another nomadic steppe people, a lot like the Huns, except these guys come from kind of western China, and they migrated south and westwards into the Indus Valley and stuff like that. Another horse archer faction, essentially, except they start off over here instead of over here. Then you got the Ostrogoths, which are practically the same as the Visigoths, except they start off way over in kind of Thrace, I think it is, that kind of region over there, near where Dacia was and stuff like that. So yeah, that's where they start off. But yeah, they're very much the same as the Goths, the Visigoths, but they're just a different faction. Then you've got the Romano-British. Britannia had been part of the Roman world for nearly 350 years, and the Christian for almost a century. The province was on the edge of the empire, but that didn't make it any less important. Constantine the Great had actually been proclaimed emperor in Eboracum, which later became York, where Variax lives, for a point of reference, in northern Britannia. A tremor of fear must have gone through the people, however, when the last legions were withdrawn to defend the imperial heartlands. In 410 AD, the inhabitants of Britannia were disappointed to find out that their formal request for help to defend their corner of the Roman Empire had been turned down. Emperor Honorius wrote to them saying in effect that they were on their own, and that the defence of the Saxon shore, as the vulnerable coastline was called, was in their own hands. Honorius had his reasons, but this was of no satisfaction to the loyal Britons. So there you go. Basically, it kind of devolved into a series of petty kingdoms that were all to varying degrees influenced by previous Roman rule. The Romano-British, they're kind of a weird sort of a faction, really. A lot of their troops are Roman in origin, except they're of inferior quality, essentially. And they have a bit of a tough time because they have a crap economy, and they have to defend themselves against the Picts and the Saxons, sailing across the sea and landing on what was called the Saxon shore, which was basically the east coast of England, where the Saxons constantly kept landing and trying to attack and raid and pillage and so on and so forth. So yeah, they're a pretty tough faction, as it says here, estimated difficulty hard. They do start off with some good units. The Romano-British have some pretty excellent cavalry. That's probably one of their saving graces. So yeah, basically there you go. That's them in a nutshell. Interesting lot, I suppose. Again, like I said before, King Arthur was supposedly one of the Romano-British, and he originated from the Romano-British kingdom of Dumnonia, down in what is now kind of Cornwall, I think. So yeah, it's an interesting faction to play as. They weren't in the original Barbarian Invasion, playable anyway. They're an emergent faction that emerged if Britannia revolted against you when you were playing as the Western Roman Empire. So there's them. We also have the Slavs, which start up way up the top of the map there, even though it doesn't say it on here. Estimated difficulty hard. I don't bugger all about the Slavs, quite honestly. Another barbarian faction, basically. Don't know much about them, never played as them. Burgundii, they start off as a horde faction. Again, it's another Germanic faction. All the Germanic factions in this are very, very, very similar. Like, they have varying unit rosters, but essentially they all fight in kind of a very similar sort of a way. So yeah, the Burgundii, they start off in Germany, and they are a horde faction. So then we have the Berbers, which are desert tribesmen who live in sort of North Africa down here. Again, estimated difficulty hard. Don't blame me, because they have pretty terrible units, which mostly consist of kind of desert skirmishers and such, like, so on and so forth like that. Then you have the Alemanni, who are kind of they kind of start off in like southern Germany, peeking over into Gaul. Again, another Germanic barbarian faction that's very, very, very much like the Franks and the Burgundii, etc. Okay, now this is the Imperium Romanum Orientalis, which is basically Latin for the Eastern Roman Empire, who start off with this, basically the eastern half of the Roman Empire. Estimated difficulty for these guys is moderate, for the simple reason that the Eastern Roman Empire had it far easier than the Western half, because the Western half was actually quite poor economically, whereas the Eastern half had all the good bits like Greece and Egypt and Anatolia here in the Levant and that kind of stuff. These guys mainly have to deal with maybe like the Ostrogoths, the Huns, as well as the Sassanid Persian Empire over on this side of the map here, essentially. They're, as it says, difficulty moderate, because they're a lot easier to play than the Western Roman Empire, because their economy doesn't suck as much and they're not being attacked from as many sides. So there you go. They're basically, if you want to play as the Romans but want to have an easier time of it, you might as well pick the Empire East. Okay, now we have the Empire West. Pretty self-explanatory. It's the Western Roman Empire. They're in pretty dire straits. Their economy is in the shitter. They've lost loads and loads and loads of territory, including pretty much all of Gaul. They've got Italy, except it's been overrun by Goths. Yeah, these guys are, estimated difficulty hard. These guys are not easy to play at all. Generally speaking, if you're not playing as them and you're playing as someone else, they will probably get crushed fairly swiftly by the other factions, because 410 AD is pretty close to when the Roman Empire finally did collapse in the West. So, you know, you're fighting a losing battle in this, unless you're really good at it and can sort of somehow magically turn it around. But anyway, yeah, if you want a really masochistic, super difficult experience, there's the Western Roman Empire. Who else we got? The Lakhmid Arabs. They're Arabs, essentially, before the rise of Islam. So they're kind of a mixture of pagans and Christians who start off down here in, Arabia. And that's basically all there is to it. Their estimated difficulty factor is hard for them. Unit-wise, they're not brilliant. Like, they're not as good as either of the Roman factions or the Sassanids, but they're not bad either. They're a fairly average sort of faction. They're not as bad as the Picts, essentially, is what I'm saying. They're an interesting faction to play as. I've played as them once or twice, and tried to overrun all of most of the Eastern Roman Empire and a bit of Persia as them. It's really bloody difficult, but they're an interesting faction, I guess. Okay, so lastly, well, not quite lastly, but we have the Imperium Constantini, which is another Roman faction, a third one, which controls most of Gaul. Their estimated difficulty factor is hard. In 407 AD, dismayed by the deprivations suffered by the Western Empire, troops stationed in Britannia elected their own emperor. Another soldier named Constantine the Great, his namesake but not his equal, was also proclaimed emperor in Britannia. Constantine's origins are obscure. We know little about him as a man, though blah 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 blah. Essentially, he went off to Britain and he decided, screw this, I'm declaring myself emperor, declared himself emperor, buggered off, back to Gaul. He now has most of Gaul, and basically he's going to try and take the Western Roman Empire for himself, so he is emperor of the West, essentially. So within the Western Roman Empire there is kind of a civil war going on between Honorius and Constantine, which is, you know, these two factions here. It's difficult to say which one's harder. I think the Western Roman Empire is probably harder because they have more ground to cover. The Imperium Constantini is equally pretty difficult. They have a terrible economy as well, and they, unlike the Western Roman Empire, have to deal with people like the Franks and the Burgundii and the Alemanni up all along the Rhine here trying to invade, so yeah, it's not easy. And last we have the Langobardi, which are another Germanic faction that I know bugger all about, essentially. So yeah, there you have it. That's all the factions. I think I might have waffled on a bit there, but I figured because a lot of people won't have played this mod before, they probably know bugger all about some of these factions. So, hey, shut up, dog. I'm talking. This is important stuff, sort of. Anyway, so that's all the factions. And you can cast your vote in the comment section for which one you'd like to see me play. It's quite a big selection, as you can see. I don't really have any personal preferences either way. I figure you guys will probably pick a decent one. I have an inkling of which one you'll probably pick anyway. No, shush. Enough. I'll get to you in a minute. Anyway, that's it basically. Have fun voting and stuff, and once that's all taken care of, we'll actually get the Let's Play started. So, ta-ra for now.